Afternoon, and welcome to the Michigan Department of Education Teaching Comprehensive History webinar. I am Delsa Chapman, serving as the Deputy Superintendent for the Division of Educator, Student, and School Supports. Today's webinar will focus on the sharing of public resources that are available through the Library of Michigan. We are elated to have our library experts in the persons of Melinda Babarskis and Kendall Darrell here with us today as they present multiple online spaces to access materials that support educators' efforts in teaching comprehensive history. These shared resources will focus both on primary and secondary documents for inquiry-based instruction. The resources definitely align to state standards and are categorized to assist locating materials for educators and students conducting research on specific historical topics. We are very excited about you joining this Teaching Comprehensive webinar session. And now to Scott Koenig for some housekeeping.
Thank you, Dr. Chapman. And good afternoon, and thanks for joining us. My name is Scott Koenig, and I'm a social studies consultant with the Michigan Department of Education. We're thrilled to have all of you in attendance as we continue the Comprehensive History webinar series. Before I introduce today's presenters, I want to share a few housekeeping announcements. Participants' video, audio, and chat features have been turned off. Questions for our presenter may be added using the Q&A feature. If time permits, questions will be addressed toward the end of this event. If we run out of time, we will follow up Q&A with email. Also, if you would like a sketch, please be sure to sign in on the Sketches link that will be provided in the chat feature in today's presentation. You can adjust your speaker view options anytime by selecting the View button at the top right of the Zoom window. Towards the end of today's presentation, a linked survey will be presented to you at the close of this webinar. Please provide us with your feedback. Closed captioning and an American Sign Language interpreter have been provided. If closed captioning isn't automatically visible, select the Show Subtitle option. Your interpreter for today is Carmen Johnson. The Library of Michigan contains many public resources. Our library experts, Melinda Babarskis and Kendall Darrell, will present multiple online spaces to access materials that support educators' efforts in teaching comprehensive history. These shared resources will focus around primary and secondary documents to support inquiry practices. These resources align with Michigan state standards to support classroom implementation. In addition, categorized resources will be shared with attendees to assist locating resources that support efforts in teaching historical movements. Thank you for joining us today, Mindy and Kendall. We are anxiously awaiting to learn about what the Library of Michigan offers to support learning comprehensive history in Michigan's classrooms.
Hi, thank you so much for having us today. We're going to be splitting the presentation, so I will be talking during the first half, and then the second half, Kendall will be coming in. But first, let's introduce ourselves and what we're going to cover today. Today, we're going to be talking about teaching comprehensive history, specifically focusing on locating resources, newspaper resources for Asian American and Pacific Islander research. So I am Mindy Babarskis. I'm the Michigan Collection Reference Librarian at the Library of Michigan.
And I'm Kendall Darrell, and I'm one of your state reference librarians. And I'm going to share our presentation now.
All right, so I'll go ahead and get started. As you can see, our teaching comprehensive history, newspaper resources for AAPI research. And then let me just first tell you a little bit about the Library of Michigan. So it is an institution that was created in 1828. So we are one of the oldest state institutions. We were created to collect, preserve, and provide access to the story of the state and to support libraries in their role as community anchors. So starting in 1828, that was only 131 books. Today, we have several million items. And our goal is really to make sure that Michigan's story, both through its government publications and the things created by the people of Michigan or about Michigan, are preserved, and also that we're supporting Michigan libraries in any way we can. So today we're really focusing on those newspaper resources. We have a large amount of newspaper resources through the Library of Michigan in a couple different ways, a few different ways, excuse me. And really, I want to make sure you all understand, of course, your social studies teachers. So you probably already know that newspapers are excellent research sources. They give students and the teacher an option to show eyewitness accounts in the context of their time. There are multiple viewpoints, so you're seeing different events through the perspective of different people and different communities, which can be really helpful in understanding comprehensive history. They trace the development of a subject or an event or a person over time. And they can be both a primary and secondary source, sometimes within the same article, depending on what you're looking at. So that's why we're really focusing on newspaper as a research source today. Specifically, since we're wanting to highlight Asian American and Pacific Islander history and social studies, especially within the state of Michigan, we're going to use the story of Vincent Chin, his murder and his trial, as our example, our research example. And we'll talk a little bit more about Vincent Chin and the importance of him and his story later in the presentation, but if any of you were able to attend the previous session, you probably were introduced to him and his story. So one of the many formats you can locate and access newspapers is print, obviously what we're most familiar with the day-to-day. And there are still some old newspapers that you can find in print. Oftentimes they're bound in these big volumes. But as we all know, newsprint doesn't hold up very well. It gets very brittle, it'll fall apart. And oftentimes there aren't indexes that are created for these newspapers. Now, when you can get an index, it's an amazing thing and makes a world of difference, but oftentimes, more often than not, you're not going to find one. So you need to be prepared to read if you do use print newspapers. And another way that you can locate these newspapers, oftentimes in the print format, is if you find a vertical file or a clipping file. Not every institution or every library has a vertical file or clipping file collection. This was definitely something that was done pre-internet. We at the Library of Michigan do still have a vertical file collection that is very rich and obviously very much focused on Michigan and its story, but other libraries may as well. So if you're able to find a topic or you locate a topic and you have an institution with a vertical file or clipping file collection, it can be a real research goldmine for you. And it can also save you a lot of research time, which we all know we don't have enough of. So for example, I have a picture of our Vincent Chin vertical file. We have our biography files. And this included a number of the articles that we're going to show later in the presentation. Sometimes in the original, just clipped out of the newspaper version. Sometimes they're photocopies. There are other ephemeral materials that also apply to his story and could really help a student if they're doing their research, instead of them having to look through all these individual papers, they're able to have the core information right here. So if you can find one, vertical files are excellent. And then probably most of your students, or most newspapers, I would say, are still found on microfilm. This is still one of the best and cheapest ways to preserve newspapers. So many of you are probably old enough to have used a microfilm machine and have had that experience. They're a little roll of film, and it's great. It's very durable. They last a long time. It can fit a large amount of information on a very small reel. The problem is you do need to have access to a machine. Thankfully, at the Library of Michigan, our machines are open, and our microfilm collection is open to all Michigan residents. Well, really anybody who walks in our doors. So you could come from out of state and still do research, which happens quite often.
Out of country.
And out of country, yes, we do that too. And the other issue with microfilm, although, beyond it having to have a machine, is you also have to have a bit of a date range. You got to know where you're starting, because it is not keyword searchable. It is just a machine that projects the image. So luckily, the machines are much better than maybe some of them you used when you were younger. You're able to make clips. You can email the clipping of the articles. So it's a little bit easier to use, but it still requires that time to actually browse. And if you want to see our full title list of newspapers we have in microfilm, the Library of Michigan actually has one of the largest collection of Michigan newspapers. You can go to michigan.gov/library newspapers. So if you want to make your students really feel like they're doing some hardcore research, have them come in and use those machines. Now, some of the easier and more accessible ways to locate what you need in newspapers are newspaper websites. There are some open database and digital collections. So especially for Michigan newspapers, I probably use this daily, is the Central Michigan University Clark Historical Library's Digital Michigan Newspaper Portal. It's a very long thing. If you Google Digital Michigan Newspaper Portal, this will come up. And they have done an incredible job at CMU looking at every county in Michigan and creating a list of every paper that they have been able to locate that's available digitally, what years are available digitally, whether it's you have to pay for it, whether it's free, whether it's hybrid, and they have the link right there. So I've many times been doing a research question for somebody and been able to find what I was looking for through this website. Another excellent free database digital collection is Chronicling America from the Library of Congress. If you've never been there, I highly recommend playing around there after the session maybe. There are newspapers that have been digitized from all over the country, starting way back until fairly recent. And Michigan does have some, I would say, digital Michigan newspaper portals probably going to be your better bet for Michigan. But there's still a number of great resources and newspapers on there as well. The one that you're probably going to come across the most when it comes to digitized newspapers are newspapers in databases, and very few are actually open and free. Most of them are you have to have a subscription to. So a lot of you may be familiar with newspapers.com. That one you have to pay for a subscription, or the library will pay for this subscription. Very expensive subscription, so that their users can access it for free. So you'll see that a little bit more when we talk about the Library of Michigan databases. But those, again, you'd have to have your library card and password to get in. It's not just going to be open to anybody. But these can be excellent resources because they're easy to search, and there are wonderful ways to save the newspaper clippings. You can oftentimes email them to yourself, download them, clip a specific clipping instead of getting the whole page, of course, printing them, and they'll even create citations, which can be very helpful for your students. And then one of the major ways that you'll be able to access papers across the state is through mel.org. So mel.org has more than just newspaper resources, and it's got a lot of excellent e-resources that are freely available to all Michigan residents. You don't need a library card. It is located through geolocation. So it's a wonderful resources for you and your students to use. I can't emphasize that enough. There are resources specifically geared for students to get that firsthand experience searching. So there's a few e-resources for social studies that I'm going to mention here. Explora for middle school or high school. I know many of you are secondary students, so secondary secondary teacher, excuse me. So those resources would be good for you. Newspaper Source Plus, that's going to give you that national newspaper resource. Gale in Context Opposing Viewpoints, which I'm going to actually show you a little bit shortly. And this is a great resource, especially when you're dealing with a hot topic or a topic that is on the minds of Americans. And not all of them are necessarily historical. Some of them are much more current, but they do a really good job of bringing in the context behind why these different topics have become so talked about today, is they give you that sort of the history behind it. So I think it's a good resource for social studies teachers and for students to really get their feet wet when it comes to research. So let me give you a little brief tour of MEL. And I should mention, MEL is provided by the Library of Michigan and the Midwest Collaborative Library System, MCLS. And together we make sure that this is available to all Michigan residents. So we're gonna go hop in there. Just give us a second while we change our sharing to the websites. Yeah. It's always trying to find the right window. And then,
Do you want to?
oh yeah, I'll
run
take
this
over
one?
from here for this part. Oh, yeah.
That's fine.
All right. So as you can see, we have mel.org, so Michigan Electronic Library. And there's a couple things that I really wanted to highlight for you. I won't spend a ton of time in this resource, but if you look on that top white banner, in the far right, we have that educators link. This is an excellent resource for educators, shocking, I know. And it has some wonderful resources for you. I highly recommend taking a look at the help and training section, just to give you a picture of what that would look like. There are different educator guides, different EduPath courses you can take. As we scroll down, if you're wanting to have your students use a specific resource, for example, we're going to be looking in the Gale in Context Opposing Viewpoints database. This link would give you access to instructional videos, to some topic finder, classroom integration, Google Classroom resources. So really a great tool for you and for your students. And so I highly recommend checking out that educators webpage on mel.org because it is geared towards you. And today we're going to spend most of our time in the e-resources. So it's that first option in the white banner, the one on the far left. And as you can see, they've done a great job of narrowing the e-resources into some core sections. So if I'm a public librarian, these are probably going to be the resources I'm going to want to use more. Or if I'm a patron of public library, the K through 12 schools obviously is more applicable to our current audience. So we're going to take a look at that. So I'm just going to select the K through 12 schools. And then as we scroll down, it even separates it based off of if you're elementary or secondary focus. So we're going to go into teen because I know many of you are secondary teachers. And just to give you a little tour of what this looks like. So you can see at the top, there's an alphabet. This is for if you know specifically the name of the resource you want, you could go straight to the letter and it would take you there. But if you're not really sure, you're trying to figure out, what would be sort of the best bet for me to get started. They have these best bets at the top. It's a little hard to say. So I'm going to scroll down a bit on those best bets because Gale in Context Opposing Viewpoints is listed here. Another thing I will point out too, and this is, I don't know why it does this, but the best bets are always separate. They're not going to be found in the alphabetical list. So if you don't see the one you're looking for, check that best bets at the top of the page. It may be up there. So we're going to go ahead and select the title, that name of the database. And I'll just give you a little tour of what we're looking at here. So as you can see, there's a great little search box. If I wanted to do a more in-depth search, I could click on the advanced search and it would give me option to do, different Boolean word searches and narrow in different ways. We're going to keep it pretty broad for now, but I wanted to show you how it breaks it up. So if you have a student who's looking for a specific topic As you scroll down, you're going to see some of the hot topics. They even have broader categories, and within that, some subcategories that have recently been updated or new or in high demand. You can also just view all of the issues by going here at the top in this little white banner underneath the search box to browse issues with the little light bulb. I'll show you that real quick. And you can see it lists everything. I was lucky enough to find an issue that really fit within what our research was for this presentation. So I was able to locate it. It's a bit of a ways down here. But as I was scrolling, as you can see, there's lots of options for you. There is actually a subject or an issue of discrimination against Asian American and Pacific Islander communities. So I selected that. And it gives me a nice little overview. I could read more. So this is a great way of, helping students get introduced to a topic and just kind of understand, why is this a debate? What are the different sides of this issue? What are they saying? And as I scroll down, you can see there's all sorts of different types of resources that I could have my students focus on. So if I really wanted them to look more into what are different magazines saying or what are academic journals saying, this would give me an option. I could go specifically to that type of resource, or I could just let them sort of look around and select the article that most interested them. So I'm going to go ahead and click the back arrow, because I think most of your students, we'll do one more back arrow. Most of your students are probably not going to be doing the issue. They may have a very specific thing in mind, like, oh, I know what I want to find. So for them, it might just be easier to do the search box. So when I did my search, I did a nifty little tool that I hope all of you know about. And it's called phrase searching. And I used quotes on either side of Vincent Chin. So this is a way to tell the database, I want articles or books or resources that mention Vincent Chin in that order and those words together. So it searches it as a phrase. This helps to make sure I'm getting more relevant articles. So I think this is a very easy tip and trick to teach your students as well. Now, I always tell them, if you're not positive that it's always going to show up as that phrase, don't be putting quotes around it, because then you're going to discount things that you might not want to. So it works really well for gun control, social media, Vincent Chin, because I have a specific name. But if it were something I was a little more broad and it might show up in different wording, I wouldn't want to use those quotes. So I'm just going to go ahead and search that. We'll see what we find. And as you can see, there's some great resources that have come up. I'm just going to scroll a little bit down so you can see how it lists the different reference resources. So you've got a good reference resource in this biography. There's audio that I could listen to, magazines, and then of course, newspapers, which is what we're most interested in today. One thing I will point out too, you're looking at the dates and you see that many of them, 2021, 2022. But as I went into there and dug a little deeper into the different types of newspaper resources, I was finding some that were taking place in the 80s, right after the trial, were more primary sources. So this does have some historical resources as well. It's not just current in that sense. So that can be helpful. It could be both a primary and a secondary resource for you. Let's just take a look at one of these articles. I'm going to look at, what does renewed interest in Vincent Chin say about anti-Asian racism today? So maybe this is an article that I'm going to want to save and look into and see if this would fit with my research paper. And as I scroll down, I can see there's lots of options to save it. There's options here at the top white banner. There's also options above the article. So I can send it to my Google Drive. I could send it to Microsoft OneDrive, email it, download it, print it. And then I think for most of your students, they're going to be very interested in the citation option. So here at the top in that white banner, there's the cite with the little quotation marks. When I select that, it's going to give me options of which citation style I will want, with a nice little disclaimer that I think is very important, that they're saying, listen, we try our best, but it's never a replacement for your guidebook or your instructor's requirements. So always double check and make sure you're looking at these other resources. This is a great place to get you started. It is not the end all be all. So I'm glad they have that little disclaimer. And what's really great too is it gives students options to export it to different citation resources, such as EasyBib or RefWorks, but you can also just copy and paste it into a Word document. So it's a really helpful tool for students as they're getting started in their research. Also really helpful for us doing our research so we can keep track of what we found. All right, so we'll just get out of this. Next to that. So as you can see, it's an excellent resource, and there's so much more on Mel that you can discover and play around with. Please take time, explore this later. It's very easy to remember. It's just mel.org. And this is a free resource, statewide available, that both you and your students can use. And it's here to really help and support you. All right, and I'm going to let my colleague, Kendall, take over for the next little bit. She's going to talk to you about the Library of Michigan databases.
Right. So we're back to the presentation. All right.
Yeah.
I'm going to change the slide. There we go. There's our state librarian. His name is Randy Riley. He is the head of your state library, and he's showing off with pride his Library of Michigan library card. This is just really fun to be able to talk in practical terms about using our resources, and not just the things that are available in Mel that are really widely known, but also the things at your state library or that are available through your state library that are also part of our collection. We always want people to know about their state library, and so few people do. So we're just thrilled to be able to be here right now. To use the resources that I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to focus on newspaper resources that are in databases, you need to have a Library of Michigan library card. This is not like your local library card. It's not your public library card or a university library card. It's just ours, and we're the only ones that take it, and we don't take anybody else's library card. So you can order one, you can request one online, and you have the address right here, michigan.gov/library card. Currently, library cards from us are only available to order online for people who are 18 or older. Unfortunately, we've talked to our manager about expanding this to younger people, and right now that's just not going to work for a number of reasons. So students can use our resources that are available online, but they would need to have an adult in their household who has that library card to be able to get to the databases. Teachers, I'm assuming you're all over 18, you can easily get your Library of Michigan library card. And then the databases that I'm going to be talking about are the URL for those is listed at the bottom of this slide, michigan.gov/LM databases. And we're going to look more at that next. The inspiration for this part of our presentation comes from a Michigan Notable Book. The Michigan Notable Books is a program that the Library of Michigan has been doing for about 25 years. We focus every year on selecting about 20 books to recognize as particularly notable that are by Michigan authors or about Michigan. And in 2022, one of those books was called From a Whisper to a Rallying Cry, the killing of Vincent Chin and the trial that galvanized the Asian American movement. This book is exceptional. It's written for young adults by a former Detroit News journalist who is also an Asian American. So she is familiar with the newspaper side as well as the ethnic and social side of the story and why it's so important. And besides that, the book contains the story of Vincent Chin and his murder and a detailed analysis or account of the trials that followed of his murderers. She includes an extensive timeline, and in this slide I only have a few points from that timeline. Hers is far more extensive and really takes the reader through the main points, of which there were many, of the events that followed Chin's death, his murder. Along with that, as a journalist, she understands the value of a really great bibliography. And librarians like those too. And if we don't have one in the book, we may write the bibliography because we feel so compelled. The bibliography in this book is outstanding. So students who are using this book, maybe as part of a class or some similar book, there's just a lot of really fantastic nonfiction YA material that's written with excellent research that can promote excellent research. And this book is one. So students who are using this book already have a really nice entrance into their research because they can look up these articles that are in this book that this author used. And this is a great way to introduce students to that type of research where you're actually following that paper trail, or you're looking for what an author looked at so you can expand on it. So a few things from her timeline. I forgot to include Vincent Chin was born in 1955. In 1961, and he was born in China. In 1961, he was adopted by Lily and Hing Chen. So they raised him, and he was a kid when he was adopted. In 1978, he meets Vicky Wong, who becomes his fiance. And this becomes very important in many of the articles, especially at the beginning of the trials of his murderers. And then also in this book, the author uses the Vicky Wong and their engagement, and then her, inability to marry her husband as sort of bookends to the story. And so she does a beautiful job of bringing the human part into this awful technical legal trial story and making it very human by showing it how it affected this particular woman as well as Vincent's parents. A few years later, Vincent was at his stag party right before his wedding, and he got into an altercation with some guys who worked for one of the auto companies, and they started calling him some pretty awful things while they were at this bar. And after he left and these guys were thrown out, they hunted him down and they beat him to death. And he died a few days after that. So shortly after the trials began, and for the two men, the one was the father and the stepson, and the sentencing was just incomprehensible. The judge in Wayne County said that he couldn't send these two men to jail because they were just sort of average normal citizens. And I guess average normal citizens murder people. So the judge felt that that would not be a fair thing. He gave them each a fine of $3,000 and no one did any jail time. So there was an enormous outcry over this ridiculous verdict. And eventually a federal investigation into the trial to see if it really needed to be redone. So over the course of the next few years, the trials were redone and redone. And eventually, over the course of 4 years, one of the men was cleared of all the charges. The other man was appealed his verdict, and then they were both they were both sued, and neither one of them ever paid any of the fines from the lawsuit, the civil suit. And then Vincent Chin's story became very important again in March of 2020 because COVID started in China and Asian Americans were once again targeted for abuse in all different ways in the US simply because of COVID. So Vincent Chin became a very important symbol of Asian American discrimination, especially in the United States. So I did a lot of research about Vincent Chin, and I did most of that, all of that research in really 4 databases that are available through the Library of Michigan with that library card. And I'd like to show you, before we look at some of the research, the results of my research, I'd like to show you the databases that I looked at and what else is available here. So we're going to leave the presentation for a few minutes and move over to the Library of Michigan's.
That one, it's under.
Thanks. The Library of Michigan's list of databases. So we've got Mel, we're done with Mel. And here is our list of databases, our online resources for library card holders. If you need the URL, there it is, www.michigan.gov/LM databases. There's an important notice here about using your library card and logging in. If you need to do that, that's great. Just follow these instructions. They're easy to follow. And then there's also a link to the library card application that you can get to and submit that. This page is organized by clusters. So first we have newspapers and family history related databases. There's a pretty broad variety. I'm not going to go over every single one. You can look at these later. This website's always available. But some of the really great ones that I was able to use, I used Blacklight in America. That sounds like, why would you be looking for Asian American and Pacific Islander materials in Black Life in America? And when I get more into my presentation, that will be more clear, but minorities of all kinds paid very close attention to Vincent Chin's story and the trials because they understood that the outcomes of those trials would affect them as well, would affect how their rights were perceived and handled in courts. Also, I used the Detroit Free Press historical newspaper, 1831 to 1999. This is a huge collection of newspapers. If you need history of Michigan, history of Detroit, this is unbeatable. You could do major research with just this one database from the Detroit Free Press. The Detroit News, historical and current, I did not use for this, but that's also an enormous database. It doesn't go back as far as the Free Press. So Black Life in America, Detroit Free Press, Ethnic News Watch I used as well. Ethnic News Watch is what it says it is. It focuses on news reporting all over the US and majority presses, ethnic presses, magazines, but the focus is always on some aspect of ethnic news. High focus on minorities and of all different kinds. It's a really valuable database. And then the last one that I used a lot was the Michigan Chronicle. And Michigan Chronicle is a newspaper from Detroit that covers all of the state and other broader news coverage too, but it's a Black newspaper. And they included a lot of coverage of Vincent Chin and especially editorial pieces about the trials that followed his murder. So there's much more here than what I used, but those were the databases that I focused on for this. And they gave me far more than I needed for this presentation. We have some other subscription databases that are just glommed together. These are more geared towards state government research or law research like ProQuest Congressional. ProQuest eBook Central, though, may have things in there for teachers. It's really scholarly works. I love this ebook collection, but it didn't really help me out with Vincent Chin research. There might be things, though, that springboard off of it, but that wasn't what I needed for this presentation. The education database, yeah, you should pay attention to that if you're an educator, and the Education Magazine Archive. If you're doing social studies research in depth that includes Native Americans, the ProQuest Indian Claims Insight database may be of great interest to you. Public health may also for social studies researchers or even biology teachers. And then there's a list of some databases that don't require a library card. Mindy mentioned Mel earlier. LM Digital, or Library of Michigan Digital, is our digital collection of Library of Michigan resources. This is growing all the time. There's a heavy focus on Michigan documents, so things that are published by the state of Michigan. And oh, maybe Michigan Legislative Biographies database would be of interest too for social studies. This is a list of all the legislators who have ever been legislators in the state of Michigan, and includes biographical information about them from a number of different sources. Most heavily comes from the Michigan Manual, though. And then finally, Read Michigan includes a lot of our Michigan notable books, as well as heavy emphasis on Michigan poetry now, because of some new initiatives that are going on that we hope to have completed soon. Yeah. But this is a free database. Well, it's paid for by your tax dollars. And it's available to everyone in the state of Michigan. And it's all literature. So it's fun. So let's get to what I found to pull together to demonstrate how to use newspapers for research, both for students and for teachers. So the wonderful thing about kids having access to the databases is that the teachers do not have to spoon feed the research to them. The kids can actually get in there and do their own research. And if you have a topic and you know a database that you can direct kids to, you can say, have at it. So let's have at what I found. Let's see. Thanks, Mindy. Back to the presentation. So this, I'm only going to show you 9 articles that I found and worked with. I have probably 100 or more on my hard drive that I had to say, no, not this time. And again, the databases that I pulled most heavily from were Black Life in America, Detroit Free Press, Ethnic News Watch, and the Michigan Chronicle. And I want to point out that the newspapers are incredible resources, incredible primary resources, as well as incredible secondary resources. And as secondary resources, they fill that role in a number of ways. And I'll talk about those soon. As primary, we see them giving us the blow by blow. Sometimes just the facts, sometimes the facts interpreted a bit. But especially with this particular example, the Detroit Free Press followed Vincent Chin's death and the trials for years. And for a very long time, there was at least one article every day in the Free Press about Vincent Chin's the trials of his murderers. Often there were more than one article about the events and from different contexts, so different types of coverage. The Free Press's coverage is just overwhelming. So we'll kind of go in order. The first article that I found about Vincent Chin was reporting his death. This is a week, this one in the middle, Slaying Ends Couple's Dream. This article was published a week after his death, before the trials started. So you know that they were preparing to do the trials. And this one, it really focuses on him as the bridegroom and his fiancée, and that the wedding, wasn't going to happen. He was buried the day after he was supposed to get married. So it really focused a lot on that human interest and his fiancée, Vicky Wong. So I think people who may have read this article early on were sucked into following everything, because how could you not? Later on, so this next article by Nikki McWhirter, A Lesson and a License That Kids Should Never Get, is a typical piece of editorial. She talks about, this article came out right after the first trial was over, and Judge Kaufman fined the guys $3,000 each, and they didn't give them any jail time. And so suddenly we start seeing, all sorts of editorials and commentary about the trials and about the outcome, and people starting to call for justice, actual justice. And we start seeing a movement, but we see opinions. So there's the commentary part is secondary. But if we look at these articles now, 40 years later, we can also examine the way the editorial staff covered these, and what kinds of views were exhibited in the editorials, and actually study the editorials as primary sources themselves. So that, I think this is a very interesting way to use newspapers that's different from how you would just like read somebody's book about it. And then this third article just gives an example of how widespread the news was. And this one is from 1984, so it's 2 years after Vincent's death. But these types of articles had been all over the country, and especially on the West Coast, where there were lots of Asian Americans for many generations. And so this trial and everything that followed were of great interest all over the country. And that's why the Ethnic News Watch and Black Lives in America were such useful databases, because they cover states besides Michigan. Another important part of newspaper research is that there are articles from multiple perspectives. This front article, Point of View series, begins season on controversial race issue, covers it, gives sort of an overview of Michael Moore's movie that he made called Who Killed Vincent Chin, and goes over the death and murder of Vincent Chin. And it just summarizes everything. This is in San Bernardino, California in 1989. So this is still a really highly relevant topic at the time, and he would have been well known over, on that side of the country. In the Michigan Chronicle, the Black newspaper from Detroit and from Michigan had all kinds of coverage, and especially editorials about Vincent Chin, and the kind of reaction that Black Americans had to these verdicts as well, because they understood that if judges are giving such light sentences, negligent sentences to people, murderers who intended to harm someone or kill someone, that they also could be targeted. So this was a really big deal in all sorts of communities. And then the Free Press again did just such a fantastic job of showing how, not just the dry courtroom step-by-step stuff, but also how this affected Vincent Chin's family and other people who were related to the family. So this picture of Lily Chin it's really famous. You'll see it if you study this. If you study these trials, you will see this picture everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, I should change the slide. Finally, newspapers provide us a way to see how an event, what repercussions an event had, and to do secondary research on those as well. I think one of the most fascinating things that was really close to the first trial that came out of it was this investigative reporting that the Detroit Free Press did on the types of punishments that were given for manslaughter trials or convictions. And they did a 6-week series on this that had a lot of articles in it, and they examined many different cases of manslaughter and how those were dealt with in the court system. And that kind of investigative reporting is something that we really need our newspapers to be doing, because that's how we find things out about what works and doesn't work in our systems. Again, we had, let's see, the second article that from June 2016, 2022, we see that, Vincent Chin is still 40 years later, still a relevant topic. And this particular article talks about how Asian Americans were being targeted during the beginning of the COVID pandemic as, scapegoats for what people were going through. This is from the New York Times. So even in a paper as large as the New York Times recognized that the relevance of Vincent Chin's death and how that has just been important in the US, in our culture. And then finally, a plug for teaching history well.
Yeah.
From August, just August. So when I wrapped up gathering articles, there was an article already, or as recent as August 2022, about how Vincent Chin's death reminds us that we need to have Asian American history, comprehensive history taught in our schools. So this is just a small sample of the kinds of things that I pulled from 4 databases. Most of the stuff really came from 2, and you haven't seen hardly any of what I pulled. So there's a lot to be pulled from our database collection. And I see Scott there. So I'm going to wrap it up and remind you one more way how to reach us. You can contact us through our phone, email, website, or address. And if you need help, please, we have library staff ready to answer your questions and help you with your research as well.
But also don't forget to talk to your own librarians, whether
Right.
they're your school or your public library too, because you have excellent resources much closer to home too.
All right, I'll stop sharing.
This was wonderful. Kendall, Melinda, thank you so much. This is a wonderful example of modeling and showing how Mel and the Michigan Electronic Library and our Library of Michigan can really present numerous resources for educators, for classrooms, and in multiple ways. I love how this presented a specific human interest space today. So thank you for sharing that, as well as I really appreciated your conversation around the empowerment of students' opportunity to do their own inquiries, to really design their own compelling question, and then dive into resources that are factual, they're unimpeachable, and resources that are both primary and secondary resources for their work. There was one really good question I want to ask before we wrap up. So the question is, do the resources in MEL, so e.g. Gale and context articles or resources, display terms or use or permit educational use, including display within online course content? So do you know if when educators and students get in, are there terms of use or permissions that does MEL allow or tell if it can be used, if it cannot be used along these lines?
I can't answer that question specifically. I mean, MEL is intended to be used in the classroom and for personal research as well. There is contact information like in that educator section of MEL, and there's also Heather, but also she's one of the MEL trainers. I'm not thinking of her first name. Barb
Williams, or no, you think of somebody else?
No. If you go to that educator page, you'll find her. She's one of the MEL trainers.
Yes.
And you can actually arrange to have someone train you to use MEL with your students.
I hope that answered it. If not, please feel free to contact the person on the educator page, because she will know, yes, much more the specifics of.
Yeah.
the nitty gritty of that.
Right, and we have the contacts presented to us, so I think that's a solid answer in my mind. So, on behalf of the attendees, myself, our team, we just kudos, thank you for sharing this, your expertise, these resources, this plethora of online spaces to access simply through the Library of Michigan. I think many of us were very surprised at just what is really there in one centralized location to teach comprehensive history. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Y'all have been an awesome audience. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
The Teaching Comprehensive History webinar series will continue in winter and spring of 2023. The Teaching Comprehensive History team will share future webinar dates through several communication streams as soon as possible. Future sessions are planned to continue on Wednesdays from 4 to 5 p.m. Please continue